Okay. Well, thank you all for giving me the opportunity to present this today. Um, what I would like to present is a talk that I gave at the U.S. Animal Health Association meeting last October. And it's a basic overview. For some reason, this isn't looking right. There we go. And it's a basic overview of the variety of disposal options that are available for large capacity disposal in the event of an outbreak, and some tools that are available for choosing an option, and how we used the tools and the options last year. So a little bit of background about myself. I'm an environmental engineer in veterinary services, science, technology and analysis services. I've been with USDA for 15 years, and my primary role is planning and preparedness for response to animal health emergencies, specifically disease outbreaks. And I focus on decon and disposal issues. So a lot of my work relates to working with responders, determining what the research needs are, and then managing the research projects that are being performed by experts in the field to provide products to help the responders. So one of the tools that was developed throughout the last 10 years is to help people figure out which disposal option is best. And that's a fairly complex question because there's a lot of different aspects to it. So we've developed a tool, and the one on the left of your screen, if you're following the webinar, shows sort of a linear decision tree. And that is located at the URL that you see at the bottom of that slide 2. That linear tree is currently online. It was developed for avian influenza specifically back around 2006, 2007, and it is primarily focused on poultry. Since then, we've tested the tool in a number of workshops. We've gotten feedback from stakeholders, and the suggestion was that you might not have gotten rid of all of the poultry in your first pass, so maybe it's more of a loop where you go back and start over again if you still need to dispose of more material. So we have a hard copy version that has not yet been posted, which is in the loop configuration that you see on the right there. But if you were to go to that URL on the previous page, you'll see this. And if you clicked on that first bullet, how to use the tools, you would get a short training module, which basically walks you through how to use the decision tools. And especially noting the disposal section, you get that decision tree that I mentioned. And as you go through the decision tree, you start with the first question at the top, which you probably can't read, but it says, is the poultry house large enough for in-house composting? And if you clicked that bubble, you would get a list of questions that help you answer to determine if it's suitable or not. If it is suitable, then you would go to the little blue bubble just to the bottom left there, and you could access a 1-hour training module about in-house composting. If you answered no and ended up that it's not suitable, then you would go to the next black bubble on the right, which asks, is outdoor composting suitable? And the reason you're getting those questions in that order is because there was a panel of subject matter experts from various federal government agencies who looked at the major disposal options and determined which were preferable based on 15 different criteria. But for poultry, it tends to be preferable to keep the animals on the farm and in-house if possible, and only moving off-farm if the volume of waste is too great to be handled on site. Another part of this online training tool or disposal tool, decision tool is a database that was originally developed by EPA, and it includes all of the landfills, hazardous waste landfills, municipal waste landfill, construction and debris landfills, wastewater treatment plants, incinerators, rendering plants around the U.S., including contact name and information for each facility, so you can call them and find out if they will in fact take the material you're trying to dispose of. And there's also a link to the web soil survey produced by the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service. There's a little dyslexic typo there. But the web soil survey allows you to either use the map to zoom into your location, and then or to use an address, just type in the address and it'll zoom to the location, and you can then outline the area you're interested in and then ask the web soil survey tool if that property is suitable for burial of carcasses in trenches or pits. And it's the result is based on soil types and depth to groundwater at that location. So it's pretty cool. But anyway, so a little closer look at this decision tool. So the current most updated version is the manual version, which has gone through some iterations based on stakeholder input. And by the way, we are in the process of updating all the training modules and the tools to be loaded online to replace the older modules, and that is expected to happen mid next year, so about a year from now. But meanwhile, we have this basically a Word or PDF file of the information that I'm happy to send you at any time before then. And so this is what it looks like. It's the manual carcass management decision tool, which consists of a matrix, a loop, and a checklist. So we fondly call it mulch. The matrix was developed by that panel of experts I mentioned earlier, and it looks at the 6 major disposal options, which are permitted landfill, rendering, permitted incineration, composting, unpermitted open air burning, or unpermitted on-site burial. And when I say unpermitted for those last 2, I mean you still have to get approval from the state to use those options, but they don't have regulations that say how you do it. Those are more emergency operations that have to be approved at the time that you have the incident. So anyways, of these 6 major disposal options, we looked at 15 different criteria, everything from public health risk and biosecurity to regulatory restrictions and cost effectiveness. The criteria were ranked in order of importance and weighted so that biosecurity, pathogen inactivation, and environmental protection and public health protection were much more important than cost effectiveness or efficiency. So they were weighted 3 times. The sort of medium criteria were rated 2, and the least important were rated 1. The panel spent numerous hours debating what ranking should go in each of these boxes, whether it should be high, medium, or low. And there are very detailed footnotes which explain where all these ratings came from. And ultimately, once everything is added up and averaged, it turns out that based on the 15 different criteria, the safest, cheapest, best option is offsite landfill, and by far the least preferable option is unlined burial, which is interesting because unlined burial is what most people think of first. So using that order of preference now, knowing that landfill is better than rendering and so forth, and keep in mind now this order is really for large animals, assuming that there is no preference for offsite treatment versus on-site treatment. This changes a little bit for poultry, and we'll look closer at that as well. So assuming that that table is true, then the decision loop is revised to match the table. Although before we even get to disposal, the decision process asks the user, can you avoid disposing of these animals at all? Can you use them for their intended purpose? If so, send them to slaughter. If not, then you go to the next bubble, which says, can you use off-site permitted landfill? And it refers you then to a checklist. So the checklist looks like this. It's a very detailed list of questions. First, it sends you to that EPA database I mentioned, where, now that you're at Acme Farm in Akron, Ohio, okay, let's see what landfills are nearby. So you go to that database, you type in the information, answer the questions. It'll give you a printout of your landfills, and then you contact the facilities to see if they will take the material. If not, will they take part of the material? If they will, find out if there are any permits or special conditions and what you have to do in order to meet those requirements. And if all of those work out for you, then you can go to the training module to just get a refresher on that, and then implement. Now, we did modify that loop for avian influenza, and in this case, the on-site options are preferred over off-site, so it just changes the order a bit, starting with composting, burning, and burial, and going to the off-site options. Now, you don't see burning on this loop because we didn't use open burning in 2015 HPAI, but it would be an option potentially, although not a very good one. And of course, it then refers you again to the checklist to help answer these questions. So we can kind of look at an example of this to see how it would be used. Let's say we have a caged layer hen facility that it's got 4 barns with 1 million birds in each barn. So you've got 4 million infected birds that need disposal. And it has cages inside. The rows are 5 cages high with only 2 feet between the rows. So let's go to the decision loop. Is in-house composting feasible? Okay, let's look at the checklist. Do we have sufficient space to maneuver composting equipment and construct windrows inside the barn? So in this example, the answer would be no, because it's a layer house. The cages are only 24 inches apart, so you can't get a skid steer loader in there, and you don't have room to build compost piles. So this one's not going to work for us. If it was going to work, you could go to this training module, which looks something like this, and run through that. So since it wasn't going to work for us, let's find out, well, what about outdoor composting? Well, from the aerial photograph, it looks like we don't have enough land area to build the compost piles. So let me go back to that aerial photograph. This is the property boundary, if you can see my arrow. So there's not very much space outside those barns before you get to the road and the neighbors. So there really isn't going to be a lot of space, maybe a little bit, but not very much. So certainly not enough to compost 4 million birds. As a point of reference, we had one farm in Iowa last year with 3.8 million birds. They composted all the birds, and that took 6.5 miles of compost windrows. So it takes a lot of space. So that's not going to work. We don't have room for outdoor composting. All right, so how about on-site burial? Well, we can go to the web soil survey. When we do that, you may be able to see the outline of the barns beneath the shaded areas and the roads. And you see red and yellow shading. Red means that the soils are not suitable for burial, and yellow is only marginally suitable. So we do have a little bit of space that's yellow down to the south of those horizontal barns, and then we have a little bit of space to the northwest of the angled barns, but not very much. And you can't really dig a 10-foot deep trench or pit right next to a roadway or right next to a building because you're going to undermine the stability and cause them to collapse. So you have to have distances between those structures. So you might be able to dispose of a few of the birds, maybe a couple 100,000 even, by on-site burial, but certainly not all of them. And if we go back to the criteria, it's not just a matter of having enough space, it's also whether or not you're going to contaminate groundwater. So it would depend on how far you are from the nearest drinking water well and what the soil types are. So it's a complicated question, and that has to be approved by the state. So let's say we don't have room, or the water table and so forth is not suitable for on-site burial. So what about mobile technologies? Can we bring an air curtain incinerator or an autoclave shredder on site to help us? Well, what we found in 2015 was that capacity was an issue with mobile technologies. If they were small enough to be transported down the road, they didn't have enough space to process enough material. For example, an air curtain incinerator was able to process 5 tons per day of poultry, but the poultry, the layer farms were generating 1 to 200 tons of birds per day out of the cages. So clearly we'd either need 20 air curtain incinerators or 20 to 40 of them stacked up, or it wouldn't be a good option. And the conclusion of the responders last year was that air curtain was not really that helpful. So what about landfill? We did use landfill in Iowa with the egg layer facilities, but we had a big challenge with getting them to agree to take the materials because they were concerned about the virus surviving in the landfill and then in the leachate. And when that leachate was either discharged to a pond or a wetland or recirculated by spraying it back on the surface, the fear was that the pathogens would spread to wild birds, and then the landfill would be liable for spreading the outbreak. We ultimately did get landfills to open up, and it was, once we got them open, it was an excellent option. It was fast, it was inexpensive, so it was great, but it was getting the approvals that took so much time. SIA is working on a risk assessment looking at how significant is the risk from landfill leachate, and we should have that report in August, I believe was the latest projection. So landfill is definitely an option. This is a screenshot of the output you get from the database, and this was looking at a farm in Arkansas, and these were the landfills. Notice that the landfill name is highlighted in blue, which means it's a link. And if you click on it, it gives you lots of details about that landfill, like location, latitude and longitude, capacities, potential tipping fees. And the bottom line is it has a person's name and phone number to call. And those are updated every 5 years, and they were verified within the last year and a half. It's also good if you've contacted a landfill and they've agreed to take the material, that you make sure that whoever permits that landfill, whether it's the county or state, that they're in compliance with their permit conditions. We don't want a landfill that's known to be polluting to be taking our materials and then spreading it further. And if you still have materials that need to be disposed of and you've used up your landfill capacity, rendering is another option. although it's not likely to be available till later in the outbreak. Incinerators, like municipal solid waste incinerators, are another option, although the capacity is usually already used for the municipality. They're often not available in agricultural areas, and incinerators that are specifically designed to take infected materials, medical infectious waste incinerators, there are very few of them in the country. They're very expensive, and they require the materials to be packaged in 1 cubic yard boxes that weigh 140 pounds or less. So clearly that was a very expensive option. We did look into it last year, but chose not to pursue it. And finally, if the outbreak is still expanding, then considering vaccination and reconsidering the previous options is the next step. So that is a quick overview of the decision tool. See if I can get us back to get you off mute for questions. Bear with me. You. Oops. Okay. Everybody's unmuted now. Are there any questions? Any questions?
Yes, Lori, this is Lee Hall. Why
Hi.
did you consider moving birds to a landfill to be less risk than keeping them on the farm in your evaluation of the safety of the sites?
Great question, Lee. Thank you. So one of the projects that I've been working on over the past 5 years included a risk assessment that the University of Minnesota did, and they looked at different conveyances and the likelihood of spreading FMD virus from those trucks to healthy farms along the route. And they found that if we used a render haul vehicle with a gasketed tailgate with a biozip liner, which is something that can be purchased off the shelf in the commerce, that there was a negligible risk of spreading FMD with transport. And so that was compared with the situation on the farm where we had 3.8 million birds. Well, there were numerous farms with millions of birds. So, we have millions of birds. They are in the summer, they're decomposing. We don't have space to compost. There's no way we can treat them on the farm. And if we keep them on the farm, then the decomposition process is attracting vectors. Initially, it would be, insects and scavengers like wild birds or feral swine. Then it would go into the insect populations. And there was a study from Japan which found that flies carried avian influenza virus over 1.5 miles from the source. So not managing the carcasses ends up being a higher risk than transporting them safely.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions?
Yeah, I think so. Okay.
Please put yourself on mute unless you'd like to ask a question. Any questions? Okay, I'm not hearing any, Kenny, so back to you.
All right, thanks, Lori.
So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, everyone can still keep on, of course, for the audio part if you're using your computer by microphone, because some people do have microphones. And a few of you even have VTC on your computer. So.
Excuse me, Kenny. Should
Yep.
should I stop the recording now?
Yeah, I would say so, since we're primarily using it